Hi, I'm Lasse Rindom, and I appreciate you listening in to this episode of The Only Constant. Sharing is caring, and it means a lot. If this episode sparks a thought with you, pass it on. You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Claus Raasted, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi Claus, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm super excited to have you here today, and my friend Christian Bæk-Nørhave, who you also know, who was on the podcast last year, he said that you are one of the most charismatic people he's ever met, and he's never met anyone who can get a crowd going quite like that. So today it's just me, a one-man crowd, but I hope you can imagine a larger crowd out there.
I will imagine you as a large crowd. Thank you for that, and thank you for the invitation. And those are very kind words of Christians. I'm not sure I can do them justice, but I'll at least pretend I can.
Let's just up the ante, because he also said, he knows so many politicians in his work and famous people, but all of his friends, they are only excited that he knows you.
We won't dive too deeply into why that is, because we may find answers we do not like.
No, but I think there's some interesting perspectives in that, actually, and actually some interesting stories in that I hope we can also a little bit touch upon today, because I think you're definitely, you're not the tech expert typical of the podcast or something, but you have something different to you that I really, really like, and I always like to sort of I've said before in the podcast that the only constant is my curiosity. So if I'm curious about something, I will just, go there. So
I like that. I like that as a constant. And we can do a small test lesson before we get started on the actual conversation, because you have, for our listeners out there, you don't know, but we have these amazing headsets where you can hear everything sharp and crisp and ooh. So we'll start by having a test, right? I'm now going to drink a sip of my Coke, and I'm going to have like an moment, and we'll see if that's a good opener for our conversation. Okay, take it away.
Great.
Take it away.
So, Claus, really, what should companies do to get shit done?
They should buy my book. No, they shouldn't, because it's free. Also, what they should do is they should do several things. Mm-hmm. Short matter of intro here is I help organizations get shit done. That's what it says on my website. It says, are you looking for an overpaid rockstar consultant to help you with getting shit done? Then I just might be your guy. And that's what I do. Whether they are huge organizations or tiny organizations, I help them with that, because most people have things they would like to get shit done, right? We tend to have three kind of, shall we say, tasks in our lives, three kind of moments, right? There's the moments we never want to end. When my 7-year-old daughter comes and hugs me and says, "Dad, I love you," I'm not in a hurry to make her stop, right? If I'm at the World Cup final in football and I'm watching Brazil, Germany, and it's 2-2, I'm not thinking, oh, we can maybe leave by halftime. That would be nice, right? Then I just want to be there.
But maybe if your team is ahead, you want the extra time to stop.
Maybe, right? But there are plenty of experiences in our lives that we want to prolong, that we want to just go on forever, because they are these perfect moments or these lovely moments. Then there's the stuff that we do because it's hard, right? If you ask somebody, why did you climb Mount Everest? I've had the pleasure of meeting several people who've climbed Mount Everest, and they don't do it because it's easy. If somebody came tomorrow and said, I have found some technology so we can install an elevator to Mount Everest, you would still get people going, but it would be different people. Then it would be people who went for the view, not for the challenge. Then they would find something else to climb, right? So there are things where we don't want it to be easier because we do it because it's hard. Then there's the rest, right? Then there's the stuff, there's the presentation for tomorrow, there's the budget, there's the Excel sheet, there's the moving the boxes, all this, there's cooking dinner. For a lot of us, we just want it to get done. And if somebody can help us with getting that done, if somebody can give us some tips, that's nice, right? If you could cook dinner for your family just 5 minutes faster every evening, you'd say, yeah, I want to do that. I can save so much time. And unless you enjoy cooking dinner, then it's different, right? But assuming that you are not a man who loves the kitchen as his arena, but just want to get that pizza done.
I actually like the way you said, that if you put an elevator to Mount Everest, people wouldn't go because it resonates with the last episode I had with Mark Long, where we talked about the discomfort of being innovative, right? That we're sort of mixing it together right now. We have, he said, a lot of processes and businesses are built around control and doing what we know we're doing the same thing. And now suddenly we have, a complete tech upheaval or COVID or changes in macro politics, geopolitics, whatever, that just upheaves things, right? And what does it do to us when we mix these things together? Why we do things?
Well, it makes it tricky because let's say we are having this podcast, right? Beautiful invitation. We have a nice room. There's a nice view. Even there's a statue of a bird. It's like there's all sorts of good things going on, and we're both having a good time. If you know that you have to pick up your kids in 45 minutes, then your mindset will be, let's just get it done. Get it over with. And if mine is, I could talk for hours, which obviously is my mindset for this sort of thing, that means I'm in no hurry at all because I'm having one of these moments where I just want it to go on. Maybe not forever, but still I could do this for several hours and you just want it done. And that means that we think we're doing the same thing, but we're not because we have different motivations. And that's tricky. And when people are doing innovation, what will usually happen is some people get super excited. Yes, let's try the new, the different. Let's make all the mistakes and do the experiments and go into uncharted territory. And somebody else is like, let's make zero mistakes. Let's get it done as fast as possible. Let's have zero risk. Let's have no problems. And usually the people who get super excited, they're like the creative, entrepreneurial, woo. And the guys in legal and finance are like, can we please stop this? Can you just tell us what is right so we can go there right now?
Yeah, but I always also say often, right, and I've said this also on the episodes before that AI, which this podcast is about, right, currently the biggest upheaval in tech and business, right, is a success when your most busy people can live without it, right? So it's sort of the same vein, right? So you have these people who are having time for testing and playing around and being in these innovation theaters, as I think Thor called it also on the podcast, but not really impacting the real work, right? And they're like super, super impatient to get things embedded in production and with the people who are busy. Why don't they just adopt this? While the other people are like, why can't we just do what we know we have to do? I don't have time for your innovation, right? So how do we bridge these two disappointments or annoyances or discomforts?
So I think that you hit upon something pretty central there. How do we bridge these annoyances or these discomforts? Well, there is something interesting. And when I talk about getting shit done, a lot of it is understanding what are we actually trying to do and why are some people resisting it, right? If you're a very small organization, so let's say you're two friends who have a startup. You're working out of the classic garage, Silicon Valley style, and you're trying to do something. Things will go very, very fast. Oh, we want a new logo? Bam, new logo done. Oh, we want to change the website. Oh, now we're suddenly doing shoes instead of blenders. Okay, let's do that, right? The speed of innovation is incredibly fast, but there are no resources. Nobody cares. There's no marketing. There's no structure. We don't understand contracts. We don't have any money. There's all sorts of problems, but we can innovate very fast.
No consumers either.
Right? There's no customers. There's no reputation. There's yes, we can change the logo, but nobody's going to watch the website anyway. If you are Coca-Cola, imagine Coca-Cola doing 8 logo changes within a month. That's not going to be necessarily a good signal to send to anybody. No. So when you have these people on one hand who just want to change things and say, and like me, right? We went things to be different. We want to test them out, try them, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the people who are like, whoa, let's not do it unless we're certain. And the bigger organizations grow, the more that becomes usually a divide, right? If you look at it simply that it's a very small organization, they're usually the finance, legal, HR, whatever you want, like the structure guys. They serve the innovation people because usually they are the same person, or there isn't really a HR thing because there's like two guys in a garage or two women trying to create some new product to change the world within fighter jets or something out there, right? And then as it grows, then you suddenly bring in somebody who's like, okay, we're tired of having no control over our money. Let's bring in somebody who understands the finance. And then suddenly you're serving that person, unless you're really careful. And as it grows bigger, then you bring in a legal department who says, this has been very good, guys, but you've also broken the law 17 times in the last month. Should we fix this? And you say, whoa. And suddenly, before you send out a new logo or a new product or new something, you need to make sure the legal people are happy, right? That the structuralists are really good in the big organizations because they keep them from failing, where the innovators are important because they give a chance of winning. And these are not the same things. If we, for a moment, take the former Chinese leader, Mao Zedong, took over, who basically led the Chinese Communist Revolution during the Second World War, was absolute ruler of China until 1976. One of the things that he did during the war was he looked at it from a 3-stage perspective. Stage 1, do not lose. Don't care about winning, just do not lose. Stage 2, build strength. Stage 3, try to start winning. And when you look at it from that, imagine you are a football team instead, right? What do you do first? First, you make sure you do not lose. So first priority of business is nobody scores against us. First part, we don't even think about attacking until we have that. Stage 2 is, okay, we try to see if we can build up some strength, or we can find out where their weaknesses, yada, yada. Maybe their left flank is not that good. Stage 3, we start going offensive. Now, that's one way to play football. You could also play football and say, it doesn't matter if they score 3 goals as long as we score 7. That's a very different approach to things. And if you are an innovator, if you have that entrepreneurial spirit, then there's a good chance, not necessarily, but a good chance that you are thinking like, it doesn't matter if we take in 3 goals as long as we score 7. It doesn't matter if we make mistakes as long as we win, because we're thinking about winning, about growing, about trying, about succeeding. And we're okay with mistakes. If you are in the other camp, if you're in the Mao camp, it doesn't make you a communist warlord, right? But it does make you, if you are somebody who lives in the legal department or the finance one or the HR one, usually your task is much more about preventing errors and preventing failure than it is achieving success.
But that's also because there's something that works, right?
Yes, because somebody has gotten to the point where it works, and now you're there to make sure it doesn't go totally to hell. When it comes to getting shit done, part of what I try to teach people is a certain amount of biases, a certain amount of mindset changes, so you can work within these things without killing yourself.
So what are some of those?
So I operate with 6 biases. The first is a bias towards action. Do stuff. Even if it's half-hearted, do it. Even if you're uncertain, try. Even if you don't know what you're doing, try, right? So if you are in doubt, do rather than do not. Because even if it doesn't work, and it may not work, then you're going to learn something, and that means it might work next time. Take the shot.
That's the Søren Kierkegaard way, right? You know, if you do something, you might fail and lose your footing, but if you don't do anything, you might also fail and lose your life.
Yes, and if we take a slightly less Danish and slightly more easy to understand metaphor, even though I love the Kierkegaard one, there many people have said this, but there's a Canadian hockey player, Wayne Gretzky, who's perhaps most famous for it, who says you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
And I think that if he had quoted Søren Kierkegaard, that would have been even cooler.
Yeah, but you know, there's also, but now I mentioned Søren Kierkegaard, and my mind is wondering. I know you only said 1 so far, so we'll get to the rest. But Kierkegaard also says, and I remember because I got married very young. I've been married for 18 years, 18 and a half years now, and I'm only 41. And this was something all my friends were like, what are you doing? But we're still married, so we were still happy, right? But my friend, he was my best man, and he said, he quoted Søren Kierkegaard also on my wedding, saying, marry and you'll regret it. Don't marry and you'll regret it as well.
Yes.
So how do and you'll regret, don't do and you'll regret, or that's not what you're saying, is it?
No, but if we stick to Søren Kierkegaard, let's say that's exactly what I'm saying. Do and you'll regret it, don't do and you'll regret it as well. In only one of those two things does somebody build a car. If you're going to regret it anyway, then why not at least regret trying rather than not trying? If the Søren Kierkegaard quote had been, get married and you'll regret it, don't and you'll be happy, then that would be simple. But it is exactly as you say. Get married, you'll regret it. Don't get married, you'll regret it. Of those two, well, I'd rather get married.
Now we know. Great.
Now we know, right?
So, but that's the first one. So basically, being bias against action, just do things, try things. There's I think what you're saying is basically, okay, might fail, but you brought something to the world. You've made a mark. You've done something with the potential, right?
Because it just might work.
Yeah.
Bias number two, a bias for experimentation. Try out new things. Try new things when you're winning. Try new things when you're losing. Try new things when you know they'll work. Try new things when you know they won't. Right? Try out new things, because if you only experiment, you're going to be very hard to be around. Right? If you always cook a new dish or try a new thing or put the tables in a certain way or so on, then you're going to be pretty unstable and people will find you very annoying. But if you never experiment, it's never going to get significantly better, and it's never going to get radically better. If you always do the chili con carne dish, that's going to be great because you're going to do very good chili con carne. But if somebody comes and says, I would like some pasta, you say, I do chili con carne. This is not a kitchen for experiments. We do chili con carne and it's the best. Yeah, but I don't like that. Then you have a problem, right? Experiment, because you learn stuff from experiments. And if the world didn't have experiments, we wouldn't be sitting here now, right? Then we'd be sitting in a cave and there would be no podcast.
But this is experimentation, right? It's not revolution, is it, Claus?
Experimentation and revolution are, what's the difference?
Revolutions, they burn stuff.
So do experiments.
Not if you just hold them in this little room, right? I think Claus Raasted, who I had on the podcast in January, he said that you go bungee jumping instead of just jumping off a cliff to experience how it is to fall, right?
I like that.
So you do bungee jumping instead, because then you also get the experience, but you don't have to die.
Very, very smart man.
Yes, smart man. So I just wanted your perspective on that. Now you said that he's smart, obviously, but that's why I said revolution. Revolutions tend to be this extreme upheaval of everything, and then I'm a historian by education, right? So after a couple of years, it tends to go. The autocratic system of the French monarchy became even more autocratic with the Napoleonic autocracy after the revolution, right? So this revolutions are not necessarily almost what we want to do, because they can just mess stuff up and destroy what's always good. We just established that there's things that work, right? There's some things that are good. That's why we can even do. So my question is, do we need to revolutionize everything we do, or do we need to just experiment and add a little? This is still my meatballs. I've just added. Can you taste the chili? Claus, can you taste it? I've added a little sprinkle of chili. I like
that. I like the chili. I also think that the difference between revolution and experiment depends on who's talking about it. That the Danish Revolution of 1848, we're pretty happy with that.
Not really a revolution as more.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, but
right?
It is. Okay, yeah.
Now we're talking.
Yeah, but it's like people went to the king like, we want, okay, here you go. And
smart revolution, right?
Yes. Very Danish.
Very Danish. If we're on a podcast and somebody's listening to that, why are we not doing a radio interview? You said revolutions destroy things.
Yeah.
So do experiments. But do we think it's better? Do we think it reaches more people? Do we think it is easier to get around? Right? All these sorts of things. Every time somebody does something new, somebody else suffers. Right? I saw an Australian poster some years back where it was Australian coal miners protesting because they wanted to keep their coal mining jobs obviously, because they had jobs and they wanted to keep those jobs. Other people said it would be nice to not have coal energy because people die from coal energy. That is true. The coal miners said it would be nice to have jobs.
Yeah, and then I don't know if it's really, but one of my friends said that after Brexit that his mother had voted for Brexit because she wanted all the coal mining jobs back. She said it was bad that we didn't have them anymore. And then but then he was told her, mother, I work in tech. I don't want to work in a coal mine. Do you? He said, no, but someone might.
But someone might. Maybe a tech gold mine, right? Or a tech gold mine. But the point is that no matter what you do, I mean, capitalism works on one of the concepts there is the idea of creative destruction. That every time you do something better, you get rid of what we have. Like we're sitting in a building now on, I don't know, 5th floor or something like that. And this building has not always stood here. There's been something else on the spot we are at, and that was destroyed to make room for this building. And at some point, probably somebody's going to come along with some other use for this space, and then this building, which has taken a shit ton of man hours and of money and time and innovation and to get built, will be destroyed. Hopefully it'll be because somebody found something better to build there and not just somebody came around with some torches and said, let's set fire to the place. So in that respect, yes, revolution has a more destructive ring to it, but usually revolution depends on who's talking about it.
Yeah, but there's this thing with also, keeping in line with legacy, right? And this is back to, there's something working again. Because I always go back to that because there's an understanding of what works. I say that all the time. There's a reason that you don't move that fast, and we need to figure out what it is and how we can make you move maybe a little bit faster while keeping in line with what actually works for you. And that's, that's sort of the impossible position, but I'm hunting there. But I think there's something interesting in that tension there between not just saying do all the new hype stuff, but also saying like, okay, what you're doing is actually working for you. And I think Machiavelli said at one point, you can kill a man, but don't take his property because then his kids would get mad at you. and to some extent, you can kill a function, but if you kill its legacy or you remove all the people who want to join in on that, or all of these people, if you kill all accounting, all the accountants would want a job in the future, and then they would get mad at you. Or there's something here, right? There's a legacy and an entrenchment that we need to respect, isn't there?
At least if we work with humans, then it's smart to realize that humans are humans. And that means we work with humans. And we do work with humans, right? So if I go to you and say, Lasse, I have found a smart way so we can get rid of your job, then you're probably going to say, I will fight you all the way. If I say, Lasse, I've found a smart way so you can do your job easier, then you'll say, tell me more. Bias number 2, a bias for experimentation. Bias number 3 is a bias for asking. Ask when you're in doubt. Ask when you're certain. Ask when you're not certain. There's so many things where people simply don't ask. One of the things I teach when I teach kind of culture work is the first thing you do, whether it's in a relationship or it's a workplace or it's your family or whatever it is you double check facts and you double check intentions. You double check. If I say, Lasse, why did you park your car there? And you say, that's not my car. Then we're not having the first, because I'm talking about your intentions, and we're not even in agreement on the facts. Look at American politics right now. Most of the discussions are not about intentions, they're about facts. First, you agree on do we agree on what happened? Was I late for that meeting? Was it me who had that decision-making power? Did the client did they say yes or did they say no? Agree on the facts first, then you can talk about intentions.
This is consulting 101. Claus.
This is I wish it was. I wish it was.
In my company, it is.
Well, that's not bad. But agree on facts first, and then agree on where do we want to go or why did we do things. And way too often, people will skip that. They will think that everybody's in agreement about the facts because I know what I think they are, and everybody's in agreement about the intentions because I think I know what people's intentions are. You did this because you hate me.
I remember once I was doing a presentation in front of 11 people. There was one IT guy in the room, and the rest of them were not an IT execs actually. And they had the power to decide. The IT guy had no power to decide. But I was an IT guy at that point. It's a long time ago. And I only spoke to that guy. So we move to assumptions. I can move immediately to intentions with that guy, but the rest of them lost. I lost their facts and their intentions completely. And then I learned, I might be able to jump to conclusions because I think I am sometimes, but sometimes I need to backtrack and just take every baby step and ensure that they also understand the facts that you're trying to bring to them.
Yes, and how often have you seen a problem arise because somebody said you didn't care? That's assuming somebody's intention. Sometimes it's true, right? And often it's even further than that. It's like you didn't do this or you did this wrong. And then the other person will go, but I didn't do that. Or that's not me. You're talking about my twin brother. This is Sweden, not Switzerland, right? Sometimes the mistakes are pretty stupid, but if we don't even get that right, so a bias for asking.
But it's also about me not necessarily, if I jump to my conclusions, it's because maybe the education system is telling me that, I have to perform and show what I can say and know. But in reality, I need to step back and make sure that my teacher understands every small part of the way I'm thinking, right? That is also how you do it as well, right?
Which is tricky. And on a more kind of low-key practical level, it also means that there's so many things where we can ask people, do you want to help on this project?
My point is that asking is not just about me gaining more knowledge.
No.
Asking is also making sure that you have the knowledge to understand what I'm bringing to the table.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Asking just a simple thing of saying, do you understand what I just said? And then you will often find that people say, well, I don't know about you, but I sometimes find that people say, no. And especially because we operate at different levels, right? That you can do a 5-minute talk about the Second World War, right? I can give a 5-minute talk about the Second World War, like the basic parts of that for somebody who has no idea, who says, oh, there were 2 world wars? Okay, interesting. That I could do. I could also do a 1-hour lecture for somebody who knows about the Second World War, about some of the intricacies in the alliances and some of what is the difference between the Axis and the Allied powers in their alliance structure. I could talk about that for quite a while. I could also talk to people who are already PhD scholars in the Second World War about specific things about a certain campaign, or talk about the German mechanization efforts in the 1930s, even when they weren't allowed. But if I don't know who I'm talking to, and if I didn't bother to ask, then I'm going to be in trouble. And just to put it down to it, then we'll move on, but just to give it a very hands-on example, I was teaching at the Danish DTU, the Danish Technical University, some years back, and I arrived late. I got out of bed too late, and I was really not at my best, and I storm in there via taxi, and I go into the room, and I say, I'm really sorry I'm late, and I start talking. And then after 10 minutes, there's somebody who puts his hand up. I said, yes. I said, this is very interesting, but it seems that you think we are teachers. And I said, yes, I assume that. Am I wrong? And he says, yes, we are the technical administrative staff.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, aha, I am very glad that you told me this, and I wish I had asked. Let me now change what I'm talking about.
I did a big presentation the other day after another one, and then realized that afterwards the people were like, oh, well, you're so cool. Where is he from? And they didn't know I was from Basico, the company I'm in. So they just, some guy went on stage and started talking, and they're like, okay, let's listen to that. But
let's roll with it.
What does he want from me? Was he even here? So
yeah.
I remember this just reminds me of I saw this comic once by Strid, Danish comic cartoonist, and he wrote about how Europeans had come to South America, and it's been like then first there were the conquistadors being like, worship our gods and do this, and they're like, okay, we know what you want us to do, right? And then next is some captains, work in this sweatshop, labor, blah blah, something like that. Okay, and give us bananas or whatever. Okay, we understand. And then the backpacker comes along, and he's just like, You're so cool. Wow, you're so indigenous and you're so original. And they're like, and then the Indians like, what? What do you want from me? Why are you here? Why are you asking about what's going on, right? But this, just saying, okay, this is what we want. This is anyway. It just reminded me of that, going and not just assuming with precisions, but actually saying, have an intent. I think intent is coupled to action, to asking. You can't ask if you don't have an intent, can you?
And that brings us to bias number 4.
Oh, great. I actually didn't know. Sorry.
No, but that's good. And because you have this in spades, Lasse. A bias for curiosity. A bias for looking behind doors and seeing, oh, what's that? And when somebody says, I just came back from Spain, saying, oh, tell me more, instead of, oh, cool, what's for dinner?
Yeah.
So one of the things when I talk about a bias for curiosity, it is also about being curious, even if the information or the insight or whatever it is something that comes from an unusual place. It means being able to learn from the My Little Pony TV series as well as from McKinsey.
Yeah.
And I find that if you have a bias for curiosity, then not only will you ask more questions, but you will also have an easier chance of picking up things that may be useful from a getting shit done perspective as well, from unexpected places.
Yeah.
That you can learn so much from places where you would generally not expect to learn from.
But that's the funny, because I do a lot of memes, right? Also on LinkedIn, I post a lot of memes, and memes are like it can seem profane to some extent, right? You can be just your pure, business professional player, just posting business stuff. But I think the memes show. I always said that if you can make a joke, you definitely know the subject better. Like I always say, if you can teach it, you also need to have a very big understanding of what's going on. It's the same with jokes, right? If you put it into a punchline, you really have to understand what the topic is about, right?
Yes, and they're great ways of learning. And as you say, if you say, oh, memes are not for me, I'm a serious business professional, then you are losing out on a crazy amount of fun, but also knowledge and insight.
And also the analogies, right? There's the inference between different things, right? Again, go back to Claus Raasted, who said the thing bungee jump. He also said, and we had a long talk about that, which was quite interesting, that you need to learn how to listen to jazz.
Yes.
It's like listening to jazz, right?
Yes.
You don't know what's going to happen. It's still jazz, so you can say, okay, this is safe space. It's jazz, but what is jazz?
Yes. Claus Raasted, again, sounds like a very smart cookie.
He is the most quoted neuroscientist ever, and one of the most quoted scientists ever in the history of human. So
that's not a bad accomplishment to have.
No, it is.
So we'll quote it. Carl will quote you a little bit here more. Since you are quotable, we shall quote you.
Let's listen to jazz.
Yes,
a jazz episode.
And I think on that, whether it's listen to jazz or read more French philosophers or care about what the other side says, it matters. I listen to a lot of podcasts about history and some about geopolitics, some about war. And one of the things, there's an American researcher, Sarah Payne, who both has an interesting style. So I would recommend anybody interested in military history, check out Sarah Payne. The other thing is that she says one of the things the Americans do, she's American, that they do very badly is they do half-court tennis. They only talk about what did the U.S. do and then explain things from there. Like the Second World War, it's all explained from the American perspective. The Vietnam War explained from the American perspective. The Cold War explained from the American perspective. And one of the reasons for that is the lack of curiosity. And she says she has an excellent guideline, could be transferred to a lot of things, is if you want to understand whether a book, for example, is interesting about a certain conflict, then look at the bibliography, look at who's quoted in it.
But do you need to be curious if you're on top of the world?
No, that's the thing. You don't need to, but it might be smart to do so anything.
Then we're back to the Coca-Cola, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We need to change our brand.
And here, if we take that and then forget Sarah for a moment, I'll close her point, which is to say, if you are not quoting anybody who writes in the other side's language, then you're going to get a one-sided version of it. But if we move away from that, go to Disney, right? And Disney is this amazing giant of entertainment and soft culture and like entertainment company number one in the world, or if not that, then at least close. And Disney has Disney Imagineering, which produces their theme parks and their cruise ships and new experiences, that sort of thing. Imagineering has a research and development department where they cook up new stuff. And some years back, I have a friend who worked there some years back who went on a trip to one of our events, and we talked a little bit about some of the cool things about Disney and some of the less cool things. And one of the less cool things, I don't know how it is now, this is nearly 10 years ago, but was that there was a budget for these research and development people to go out into the world and find out what else is happening out there. What sort of great experiences are there out there that Disney can learn from? Do you know how big their budget was?
No.
0. Because they were Disney. People came to them. They were on top of the world, so why should they be curious? And of course, the Disney people were curious, but they went out on their own time, on their own money, and learned stuff because they were curious people.
But there's also their stories being written, and they're writing their own story, right? And this, I remember when I don't know if it's still there, but 10 years ago, the National History Museum in Denmark had a quote on the wall in their ethnology department that said that until the lion has a historian, the hunter will always be the hero, like an African proverb.
Oh, that is nice.
That's nice, right?
That
right,
is nice.
And to some extent, right, if there's no one writing that story, it doesn't really matter because the hunter is what we care about. He won,
Yes.
right? And that's what you're saying as well. So look at curiosity. Look at the other sides of it, right?
Yes, and
So why do you listen to the same podcast? You just said that.
Why do I listen to the same podcast?
I like to listen to history podcasts and this kind of podcast. You listen to podcasts that are what you listen to, right, Claus?
Oh, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I could give you.
What is the most odd podcast you ever listened to?
Ooh. I have this. One of the podcasts I really enjoy is this thing called 3 Minute History, where it's basically taking something, whether it's the Cuban Missile Crisis or the 7 Years War of 1756 to 63, and giving an impression in 3 minutes. That is on my favorite list. There's also it's not a podcast; it's like a video documentary thingy.
I'm just saying that the whole point of favorite, right?
Yes,
There's something wrong in that with the curiosity, isn't there, and the experimentation and the whole.
Now I see why you should have been at philosophy lesson, because you can make an argument out of anything. I appreciate that. I would say there's nothing wrong with having a favorite, right? You're married. I hope you have a favorite there.
True.
There's nothing wrong with having a favorite dish. There's nothing wrong with having a favorite podcast or a favorite way you go to work. But there's a difference between favorite and always. And here we won't delve into the marriage side of things because that might get tricky.
No, but I'm just getting at it because my point is I'm currently in one of these positions where I'm a slightly bored. Of course, I love the Only Content podcast. It's a brilliant podcast. But I'm in a position where I feel it's difficult to find what I really like. Also with books, I can always listen to a history book. I studied history, right? But it bores me, right? At some point, it starts boring me. And I remember just a couple of years back, 5 years ago, I started listening to audiobooks on quantum mechanics, right? Because I felt now I need something new and it has to be difficult. So I said, okay, let me do that. Let me finally get that over with or something. And then I got, this entire new super weird world just unfolded in front of me while I was driving. And it sort of, it stimulated me so much intellectually, right? And I'm looking for the next quantum mechanic here. That mechanics rare. That's why I'm asking you. You say I'm listening to the history, but I like this a history podcast. Okay. But now I know, and now I don't care. What is the last book you burned, Claus? That's more interesting, right?
The last book I burned?
No, but I always ask that when people start in the company at lunch. I never want to ask them, so what did you do this week? Oh, you also play football. Oh, you also, what series with your girlfriend, boyfriend, right? So I always ask them, what is the last book you burned? Or what is the weirdest thing about you? Just tell me something that's super weird. Because I want to see where you are Art Corners, where you a little Picasso-esque, right? Everyone is.
My little Picasso-esque. I think the last book I burned must have been during a role-playing event. I'm certain I set fire to a book during a role-playing event at some point or other. Like physically burned a book.
That's actually just so cool that you just actually burned the book. But we haven't even touched upon that yet. You said also some events, the Disney guy went to some of your events. What were those events, Claus? I know people can look you up, but I still think it's quite cool just to briefly mention it here on the cusp of bias number 5.
In this case, a Disney woman, but irrelevant to the story.
Sorry.
But a good example of assumptions of asking and of when is it relevant to go into detail.
Yeah.
And I think there to answer your what should you go into when you're curious, I've found that you can always dig deeper. And instead of then, now we talked about history podcast, right? I could listen to a podcast about the Second World War, or I could listen to a 2-hour thing done by a professor from the Naval War College about the maritime buildup of the U.S. between the world wars, which is very nerdy. very nerdy. But I found that by allowing myself to go really deep into stuff without having a specific outcome I need to get out of it, that allows me to never get to the bored stage. Because there's always more, whether it's quantum mechanics or history or business or philosophy or religion or whatever, what have you. There's always somebody who's done a level deeper analysis of it, or at least up to a certain point.
So should people listen to more business books if they already listen to business books, or should they step outside?
I think that in general, you should listen to stuff you don't. And that means that if you have read 100 business books, then read Maurice Merleau-Ponty's essay from 1964 about what is an aesthetic experience, which is an interesting read, which is why it's stuck in my head, even though it's 25 years ago. I have
read that. I'll reread that now. Now, thank you. Now I got the next quantum mechanics book, probably.
See, if you've studied philosophy for a while and you have read all of your Merleau-Ponty, etc., then maybe read a business book. So I like your quantum mechanics thing. And if there's something you're passionate about, then go into it. Right? I like trains. I have watched, I don't know how many documentaries about trains, and it'll be some obscure stuff like the rise of Russian railroads from 1850 to 1900.
And you know, before we go to the last two biases, I need to move into, because you know you did a lot of you had this big company with role playing for companies, right?
More or less big, right? It was the biggest of its type in the world, but it was a tiny world. It was not Disney. So when we were at our highest, we were about 50 people total. So reasonable size, but in no way big. Basico is quite a bit bigger than that, as an example. Certainly not Disney, but I felt it was a lot to manage. I have a past in role-playing. I used to run that role-playing company, and we'd used to create pretend adventures for both businesses and also just for consumers, for people who wanted to have instead of a book or a movie or a theater play, they want to have a role-playing experience. They want to have an interactive, immersive experience of being part of fictional reality. Yeah,
that's also, this curiosity, it's super linked to that, isn't it? Immersion and being the playful, maybe without the discomfort or with the discomfort, or you know, so many of the things we already spoke about, right? Why is it important for companies to do role-playing?
It's important because it is the best way to try out new reality that currently exists. Full stop, period, arrogant statement, but backed by massive experience. If you take something, right, let's say you want to learn about lumberjacks. You can read about lumberjacks. You can read poetry by lumberjacks talking about what they do. You can watch a documentary. You can listen to a podcast. You can see a
poetry.
Movie about...
I'll skip on the poetry.
I think lumberjack poetry is an undervalued niche here, right? What is lumberjack poetry about being a lumberjack? But you can do all these things. And of course, you're going to have a more immersive experience if you watch a documentary than if you just listen to the podcast. Because you're going to see, oh, that's what it looks like, that sort of thing. If you watch a fiction movie about it, you're going to have a different experience. If you go to a role-playing game, especially a live role-playing game where you are actually pretending to be a lumberjack, preferably in some sort of forest, then
writing poetry,
because of course now we've established lumberjacks basically do nothing but write poetry. Then you are going to have a much stronger and more memorable experience. And role-playing is, especially live role-playing, live-action role-playing, where I come from, is the most powerful way of stepping into somebody else's shoes. It's not 100%, right? Pretending to be a Jewish refugee in the 1940s or a lawyer in the future space conglomerate or whatever. It's not the same as being there. It's not even close, but it's a lot closer than watching a movie or reading a book. And just to give you an example of how that can look when it's at the extreme end, and I've been pretty much at the extreme end of role-playing, this is from a Norwegian event called 1944, set in a small Norwegian village, and the participants pretended to be in occupied Norway in 1944, therefore the title 1944. And there are people who are playing German soldiers, and there are people who are playing locals, and some of the people playing the locals, they play a Jewish refugee family. And during the event, at one point, the people playing this Jewish refugee family, they have bundled all their clothes, They've taken off their clothes. They're now in their underwear. They've bundled up their clothes to keep them dry. They're crossing a stream, like a small river, and they're crossing that in the dark, only in their underwear, with their clothes held over their heads because they're trying to get to the other side to escape. On the bridge over that small stream is a guy in a German World War II uniform, a replica uniform. He is walking with a German Shepherd, not a replica dog, but an actual dog, and he has a flashlight, and he's making sure nobody's crossing the bridge, right? For that Jewish pretend family, it's not the same as being actual Jews trying to escape, but it's a lot closer than reading a book. And because the mind doesn't understand fiction. The mind doesn't understand on a neurological brain chemistry level. The mind does not understand. But
that's why we play, right? It's playful.
That's why we play. And play is one of the most powerful ways of learning. If we want to throw in a quote, and that's what we do here, is Platon says that you can learn more about a person from 1 hour of play than 1,000 hours of conversation. And play is powerful, and role-playing is one of the most powerful ways of play that we currently have because it uses all 5 senses.
But I actually in the podcast with this Peter and Peter Kos from January, I ended up asking them about the alignment chart and saying because they're lawyers or legal professional. What do you call that? Now I can't find that word. Anyway, they work with law, and then we said, so there's this thing about doing things chaotically and then doing things lawfully, and those are not the same. So we start discussing that because it actually reflects something, right? I know it's D&D, and that's not what you do with this, but it reflects some part of the play. The play sort of reflects some part of reality, right? And that or the way we put it in this matrix of being lawfully good or chaotic or now I can't even remember it. Sorry, but this whole setup makes sense because we try in D&D to create a world that sort of mimics something where we can make some ethical discussions or problems, so we want to make something that plays out neatly, or plays out realistically, right? That's the point of it, isn't it? The playful thing. And we actually, after that episode, I remember Peter wrote to me on LinkedIn saying maybe we should actually play D&D because it is fun to do.
It is, and I had it's for the curious. It's online. It's on YouTube. There's a mini documentary piece, like 14 minutes or so, done by Discovery Channel. 10 years now. It's 12 years ago on a role-playing event I did with a friend, and there we have a researcher from Berkeley University, and he wasn't at the event, he's just analyzing it afterwards, and one of his conclusions is, he said, maybe world leaders should try this because it's about the value of human life and who is a citizen that has value and how do you measure that. It's based off a Danish movie, blah, blah, blah. And the point is that you have a rather serious university researcher saying, hey, maybe people should try this. So I agree.
But I tried once a democracy game for 24 hours, so I loved it. I loved all the role playing I've tried. Actually, whenever I've tried, I'm like, this is brilliant. I want to do more. It just takes so much time, right? That's the problem with the family.
That is exactly the problem. That pretend play is to get into somebody else's skin also takes some time.
So you've done that, and then you've also been at McKinsey, right?
Been at is a strong word. I've spent a couple of years as a senior advisor and a coach at McKinsey, but that's a freelance position.
Okay.
So I would never survive being a McKinsey consultant full time. They have a gear I simply don't have.
So you role played as a McKinsey consultant.
I at least got to try it. No, it means that I was brought in on a case by case basis for projects. I wasn't doing this full time.
Oh, okay, cool. But that's still quite a spectrum, right? Being a legendary role-playing legend. Now it's a legendary legend, right? But okay, tautology, I think it's accepted here. And then also being a coach at McKinsey.
It's a bit different. And one of the interesting things about doing things at McKinsey was, I would often have people saying, you don't look like a McKinsey consultant. But I would...
No, you look like a rock star, right? You didn't bring the glasses today, but you usually look like a rock star.
A little bit more than, even though today I have a suit, which fit the McKinsey world nicely. But it did mean that one of the nice things about McKinsey was that there I was brought in because of my skill set of things like culture design, experience design, behavior design, because of all of that role-playing knowledge, that was what they said, hey, you have some skill sets that are rare here. We don't need you to do Excel files and presentations. We've got people who are more than brilliant at that. Yeah. We need your expertise in culture design, experience design. That sort of more, I think creative is wrong, but a space that a lot of people see as more creative.
So you've made the bias number 4, curiosity. You've made a career out of curiosity, haven't you?
I think I've more made a career out of action and experimentation, but the curiosity has certainly helped, right?
Yeah, great. Let's move on to number 5.
Number 5, a bias for kindness. And a bias for kindness is here, kindness towards oneself. I find that many people are very bad at forgiving themselves. Very, very bad, and that stops them from many things. It stops them from going to the beach in the summer because their body isn't ready for it, they feel. Nobody cares. It stops them from asking things. It stops them from trying things. It stops them from moving on when they've done some sort of mistake. So a bias for kindness, both towards yourself, but also towards other people. And one thing is that, yes, there's the whole Christian turn the other cheek and forgive people. That's nice. If you can do that, honestly, that's good. But I have a little bit more of a low-key practical reason. If you spend most of your life caring about people who wronged you in the 4th grade or who were mean at you at a business dinner, then you're going to spend a lot of your energy on people whose minds you can't change and who maybe don't even care. So forgive the haters, if not for their sake, then just for your own.
You turn the other cheek, right? But there's also the whole shame thing, right? And that's maybe also part of the problem, right? That we're afraid of stepping outside of the line, right? We like to move in groups, right? Don't we?
Yes. I'm not a huge fan of shame. I think that shame has its place, but it should be reserved for more serious things than I think a lot of people.
I'm actually conflicting. I actually discussed this also in the episode with Corinne Woodman-Hollebeck almost a year ago, because shame is very civilizing as well. That's why how we civilize things, how we work together, how we know we can go into big groups because we know people have an adequate amount of shame to not attack each other or strip naked in front of my kids or whatever. Right? There's this shame is also productive, and I think that to some extent when you and in that conversation with her, I said it around AI that you just bring some technology to the table and say this technology has no shame, and it's sure it will change everything for you because whatever you do, it doesn't care. And I think, so I actually said we need to shame technology a little bit.
Shame it a little bit. I think that's not necessarily a bad idea. And again, I'm not against shame. I'm against shame when it doesn't need to be there.
Yeah. That excessive shame. But that's what, and now it gets difficult, right? It's easy to say, I'm against shame. But now it's something, no, shame, of course. But when is it too much?
When Claus? It's only in your head that it's too much. And often it's only in people's heads. Right? It's silly stuff. You go to a conference, you see somebody on stage, there's this amazing person on stage, and she's talking for 45 minutes about the infrastructure of the South China Sea or something interesting, and then afterwards says, are there any questions? If you're lucky, you get 2 hands. Because people are afraid that if they ask the wrong question at such an august gathering of people, then it will be shameful. No, it won't. Nobody's going to care. What are they going to do, right? Maybe they're going to think, okay, that was a silly question, but like this idea, you go to the beach. So many people don't go to the beach because they feel ashamed of their bodies. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I'm not necessarily. It's not that I'm proud of the way I look. I haven't spent enough energy on my body to have that pride. But if I go to the beach, people don't care.
I think I'm realizing that, and now I have 2 teenagers, right? And of course, they're always very self-aware, but I feel like there's a shame or some kind of, with social media, we've constructed a very big otherness that creates a lot of this internal shame in people's minds, that they think they're exposed in ways they aren't.
Yes.
And I remember my wife saying that she's a teacher, and she pulled up one of her pupils' Facebook account at one point to the big whiteboard, and then this pupil was like, no, don't show it, and she's like, all of your friends and 1,000 other people can go look at your profile. every single, So this is weird thing about is it's not a thing that's real, but it is real, but it is also, and you can't disturb, you don't want to step outside because maybe you get exposed there, but you also want to be exposed there. I actually have trouble figuring out what's going on.
You're not alone in that.
Because there's some superficiality to it and some real stuff to it as well. There's some, I want to be exposed and I don't want to be exposed. And I feel, maybe I feel the same thing. I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I want to be exposed for this, but I hardly ever. And I've always been very adamant that political is very important for me and everything is political, blah, blah, blah. But I never go political on LinkedIn. I never do it. And I feel like such a hypocrite. But there's some exposure there, right? Do you get my point?
Yes. Also, when you say you never go political, I would challenge that.
Yeah, but I always do it. Yeah, I know. But I really try aggressively to avoid, and it is in a complete conflict with my beliefs, and it's a conflict I am very aware of. That I should be more political, but I don't do it.
I think part of what to bring it back to the social media part and the exposure part is many people live their lives in their own heads like they were mega celebrities, like they were Taylor Swift. Right? Let's be fair. If Taylor Swift does something, Taylor Swift buys chocolate in a supermarket, Taylor Swift sets her hair in a certain way, 100 million people are going to care.
But I also only know what's going on in my head.
That is true, but you do know you're not Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And on this podcast...
Most of the time.
On this podcast where we're talking, we probably, right? We don't necessarily know exact listener numbers, but we probably know there's not 100 million. Or if so, then I'm very happy. Hello, 100 million people out there. But, and if it means that we know there's not zero, but there's also not 100 million.
Yeah.
So if you say something terrible, yes, it's going to matter. But it's not going to start World War III.
No.
If I say something terrible, it's going to matter, but it's not going to matter that much. No. And for most people, there is this. We all want to be relevant. I get that. I want to be relevant too. But we tend to overthink our own relevance when it comes to the bad stuff and underthink it when it comes to the good stuff. The reality is that these two are pretty close. If you have 100 million people listening to what you say, because you're Taylor Swift, then they're going to care about how you set your hair and they're going to listen to your song lyrics. If you have 10 people who care, then there's not suddenly going to be 1 million people who care when you fuck up something. And nobody's going to care when you do something good.
But it's actually it's part of the experience, I can say now also from doing the podcast, is to say, okay, I sometimes I do stupid things. I say stupid things. Whoa, that was so smart of you to say, and it's like, no, it wasn't. But I say I forget things, or the lawyer stuff before I couldn't, but it doesn't really matter. And realizing it doesn't matter, and that the bulk of it all is good. It's better than back to try. It's better to do things. It's better to experiment. It's better to put something out there than put nothing out there because you want pristine, right?
And you're not Coca-Cola. You're not Taylor Swift.
And Coca-Cola will have, a department to make sure they don't fail and another department to make sure they also know what they're good at so they can do marketing.
Yes.
I don't have that department.
Well, you do. It's just very small and it's called Lasse. All of the departments are headed by Lasse. And Lasse is a busy guy.
You know me so well.
In this case. 6 bias, and then we'll round it off, is a bias for reframing. Is for changing the game, changing the rules. And part of that is that there are many things in this life, and many of them are somehow defined by other people, right? If you want to get an education, you have to follow the rules. Because you can't just show up and say, ta-da, I now have a PhD. They're like, no, you didn't do it this way. If you want to win in cricket, you have to play by cricket rules. You can't show up riding an elephant with a shotgun, even though that might be an interesting experience because you're going to break a lot of laws and you're definitely not playing cricket.
So what has something like ChatGPT done to a business?
ChatGPT has made it a lot easier for people to get better at things they're bad at. Right? Suddenly everybody is an okay writer. Everybody can create pictures. Everybody can create structured analysis.
Create okay pictures. And okay,
yeah.
But my point is just, it just showed up and was like, oh, I can fix all of this.
Well, ChatGPT didn't say it could fix all this, but there were plenty of people who had commentary about what could be fixed and what couldn't. And what I like about it is that it has democratized a lot of creative production, which is what we see it used most for, right? And we're not even going to go into the whole what is AI thing. Let's just stick to ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT means that anybody can write decently.
Which
Saga,
is big enabled. Yeah,
my daughter turned 7 the other day. She doesn't know how to read and write yet. She's learning, but she can use ChatGPT to create stories. She can use ChatGPT to create pictures. She's very decent at the visual side, but she's still not at that level. But she could use it because it's a very, very effective tool. So it means that there's a lot of stuff that suddenly everybody can do at a decent level. Doesn't mean that you suddenly can create beautiful artwork or beautiful text or beautiful ideas, but it means you can go from very bad to quite good with the help of a tool. It's like to me, it's a little bit like a spelling help. Suddenly everybody could spell because now there's grammar checks in your Word document.
Yeah, but that's only one part of it. I obviously there's all these how it can generate code and then it get actions and then it becomes multimodal, then it can touch the world, blah blah blah, all those things, right? That I'm advising on as well, right? But my point was just getting to this whole reframing thing that now there is an AI and it will change how you work, right? But we need to first engage with how we work, don't we?
Well, it will change how you work, but it depends on what sort of work you do.
Exactly.
And some of it is...
what is value? My point is, let's define what is value for you.
Yeah, that's an easy one. What is value? That's going to require a separate conversation. But what I can say on the AI thing is that when AI came out, when ChatGPT kind of popularized AI has been here since 1956, blah, blah, blah. But it meant that people said, oh, you have to say if it's done with AI. And you're not allowed to do it with AI. Now, it didn't take that long because now you're saying we're doing things without AI. Suddenly, speaking of value, there is value to be had from saying this photo was produced without AI. This is an AI-free text. This is an AI-free whatever it is.
Buying vinyl in the world of streaming, right?
Yes, vinyl in a world of streaming. And also, it because there's so many interests in this and definitions are unclear, it gets to be surreal. Right, it gets to be surreal and weird because we have this AI, and nobody really knows what AI is. Our good friend Christian knows a bit better, but nobody knows what it is. Nobody knows what it does, and everybody's talking about it. And it has this useless quality in discussions of people will talk about something that is too big. Right? Imagine somebody coming in and saying, "Do you use electricity at work?" We laugh at that, right?
Yeah.
But we still have, but do you use AI? And sometimes if people say, I don't use AI, I say, okay, do you use Google Maps? If you played a video game, okay, then you use AI. Let's not talk about using AI, just like we don't talk about, do we use electricity?
No, but there's this old joke, right, that if it's called AI, it's probably PowerPoint. But if it's really, real AI, it's probably called something else than AI, right? So, but because then it's like Google Maps, or we call it a product, right? And right now everyone's saying AI, and I think Microsoft is also hopefully at the point where they're like a little bit annoyed that they've slashed, or added Copilot to all their products, because now it's Copilot for Business Central, it's Copilot for Dynamics, it's Copilot for Office, Copilot for... Okay, let's just remove the Copilot and say, this is Microsoft Word.
Yes.
And now Microsoft Word is AI enabled with that kind of AI as well.
Now with electricity.
Now with electricity, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So welcome to our office, now with electricity. Welcome to the 5th floor, Klaus, with electricity.
With electricity. And the reframing point, I'm happy to return to that, is that whatever you do, except for some very few jobs, you need to reframe what your role in it is.
That's maybe what we're doing when we're saying Copilot for Word, right?
Yes, and also for a lot of people, they're finding out that, for example, writing text, now you become more of an editor than a writer for a lot of people. You can still be a writer, but now being able to edit is a very, very useful skill, because going from blank page to here is a report is suddenly very, very simple.
But it takes a lot of time to be critical. It's easier to just...
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's one of the, I've been thinking a lot about that, right? I've been saying that, okay, can it do? I've been saying that for years now, also for myself to understand what should I expect. But now I'm starting to say, okay, I believe this will fix productivity. So if we say all the world's productivity in 20 years or 10 years or 5 years will be fixed with this. They can do anything, produce anything that's just, bulk production of whatever, right? Then what is left in our jobs? And then we need to go to these more subtle things, these more, the value adds become, middle management stuff, review stuff. It becomes demand stuff. It becomes, because you might have unlimited supply, but you still have to define what you want, what is value. Do you get where I'm getting with this, right? Mm-hmm. So what is it we need to do in the future, right? How do we reframe humanity to be, or work to be something? No, I had these dumb jobs when I was young where I actually had a job once where I packed porcelain. I did it one day and then I quit because I was dying. I couldn't do it. It was the tedious thing I've ever done in my whole life. Just porcelain plates, just packing them in boxes, same way. And I was like, oh no, I've packed like 20 boxes. How much time has passed? Like 5 minutes. No, I died inside, right? But now we don't. We might not even have. We don't have some people, and sometimes you do things, and maybe on another level, I do things that are also repetitive, productivity stuff. But now they're evaporating. What am I trying to get at here, Claus?
I think you're trying to get at the fact that for some people in the world, actually quite a few people, that sounds like a luxury high-end job. And for you, it's so repetitive, you could only manage it for one day before you quit.
That specific one was actually a terrible job. It was very sweatshoppy. Okay, but
that's exactly my point, that we live in a world where there are plenty of people for whom that sweatshop is their daily lived experience.
Yeah, but now we're forcing them to become middle managers.
No, but at some point, maybe. I've just been
editors.
to Mumbai.
You just said editors as well, right?
Yes.
What if everyone became an editor?
What if everyone became an editor? Then there's suddenly value in creating the original text. I think one of the things is that whenever there's a lot of something, there's value in being not that something. Right now, there are people who
that's very Bourdieu.
Very Bourdieu. There's value in standing out, and the more opportunities you have to do things, the more opportunities you also have to stand out. We can have that hanging in the air for a little bit. And I think on the sweatshop point, that there are plenty of people in this world for whom sweatshops, that is their lived reality. And they would gladly have your porcelain sweatshop job because at least it's not dangerous. At least it's only 8 hours a day and pays Danish wages. Like, I can find you, without blinking, 100 million people and probably a lot more who would have taken that job and said, oh, I have made it.
Especially at the pay I got. I got an okay pay because in Denmark, but it was... Now you shamed me,
Yes, but I didn't, right? I didn't. You shamed yourself.
I did.
Yes,
I should have loved my porcelain packing job.
No, I understand. For me, it was putting books into the Roskilde Library. When I was a teenager, I would be one of the people putting books back up on the shelves, and I had a small stopwatch in my pocket. And every time I would remember that I had the stopwatch in my pocket, I would take it out and I would reset it. So I would kind of break up time into like chunks of 2, 3, 5 minutes. And I worked 4 hours a week in 2 shifts of 2 hours. And it was so boring. And I remember then thinking, how could anybody ever have a full-time job? That sounded to me like insane that people could live with full-time jobs. Jumped to a couple of years later, I was happily working 100-hour-a-week job because I was doing something that interested me.
But I also feel sometimes then you meet these people who do Boy Scouts, right, and all these grown, the leaders of Boy Scout teams and all that. And so I do a lot of this creativity and thinking when I'm at my job, right? And then I go home and then I sit down and watch a series on Netflix and I sort of, shut off my brain. And they might have a little bit more, repetitive work, but they go and they're Boy Scout leaders and they make campfires and they sing songs. And I'm just sitting with my stupid Netflix. So is it a priority thing? I've started thinking that a little bit.
It's also about what do you do for relaxation? What do you do for fun? I spent most of my life both role playing as a career, but also as a nonprofit. So by day, I had a role-playing company. In the evenings, I had a role-playing nonprofit. Not a lot of Netflix, but a little bit.
Are you role-playing now, Claus?
I am. Just doing it badly.
I think you're doing it brilliantly, Claus. And I think we've covered almost all of the things that I wanted to ask you about. The power. I want to also ask you about the power of immersion. But I think you also said that when we talked about role playing. I had a question about what is agency, because I think there's something, getting shit done. But I think most of the things you've already covered, the 6 principles, 6 biases, that is agency as well, right? If you cover all those things, that's how you become a thing that does something in the world and become a thing, right?
I think that on agency, there is and this is a simple tip. So if anybody who's listening, this is something that either you will hate me for or will say, oh, that's actually a good point. Or you won't care. That's also an option, right? But of these two, when I talk to people in organizations about what they want to change, what is their dream or what is their pain or what is it when it goes consulting-ish and you say, okay, what do you want to be different? Then 95% of the cases, they will go directly from here's what I don't like or here's what I would want to be different to here's why it's impossible. Right? They would like to work less, or they would like to have a bigger lunchroom, or they would like to have a nicer website, or they would like to sell more, or they would like to spend less time in meetings, whatever it is, right? It's usually this low-key stuff that's very easy to understand. And then they will immediately jump to why it's not possible to change it. Agency is realizing that the opportunity space is almost always much, much bigger than we give it credit for. There's almost way more things you can do to change something than you immediately think of, right? Even something like, how do we make our meetings better? If I ask people in a company, how do you make meetings better? Most of them will start by saying, here's why we can't make them better. Or here's how it should be somebody else but me. Here's how, if the bosses did it differently, or if my coworkers were not idiots, or if the rules were different, or if I lived in Sudan instead of France, or whatever it is, right? They will come up immediately with reasons how it could change, but are outside their control. And they say, okay, that's good. What could you do? What can you? And then they usually go from, oh, I can't do anything, to realizing they have a ton of agency.
But have we spoken about this? Yeah, I think, no, but I don't think we have directly. Because it also takes bravery, right? I think there's someone said, and I don't know, make it better before you make it different, right? There's something about, instead of just changing your job, then make the one you have better. Be brave. Is bravery not also? Shouldn't that also be a part of your 6 principles?
I mean, I could probably load more principles onto there.
7 would be neat, right?
7 would be nice. No, I think actually 6 is too many already. 6 is too. I had 9 originally, and as a good example, right? I had 9 originally because I had 6 positive biases, things you should do, and then I had 3 negative ones, three things you shouldn't do. And I was writing that. I couldn't get it down in words without sounding pretty judgmental. And then I talked to my better half, who's a brilliant editor, and said, see, I'm struggling with this. He said, why don't you just leave it out? I said, yeah, but I have these 9 principles. And he said, yeah, what if you made it 6? You can't seem to talk about the 3 negative ones without sounding very negative. Why don't you just remove them? So I did. So now it's 6 principles.
I love that it's 6, because most things are 7 or 3 in business. I have an idea that, writing a book with 11 principles or 13 or some. I just want the prime number. That's weird. 17 principles for
2.3.
17 principles for messing with your OCD. Right?
Yes.
Just because I can, right? But doing things better, I think, before we just change it. I think there's something there. I try to take that to heart as well, right? Because sometimes you can envision something out there, but can you envision the things close to heart? I think growing up is at some point realizing that it's not just a blank slate anymore, where you could envision the different stuff. It could be this, that, but also saying that, how can I take what I've now built with my 41 years on this planet and make that better instead of just making it different?
Well, if it makes you happy to have that distinction, go for it. But I think I would say that one of the things that you can do when you're 41 is that your power to make things different, /better, whatever you want to call it, is insane. And what's keeping you back is mostly you and the people who are closely allied with you, right? For example, your wife is probably a pretty major influence in any of your major life decisions. But this idea that as kids we have a blank slate or think we have a blank slate, I think that as adults we don't want to realize that we have a blank slate, because it is so scary, because we actually now have the power to do a lot of stuff.
Because we like to feel that we own something from the experiences we've had. We like to feel the weight of what we've also done as something we've gained over time, right? Don't you think so?
Well, yes, but I think more that we as human beings are not really good with responsibility. It is incredibly scary if we look at evolutionarily speaking. It is incredibly scary to be the one to tell the tribe, we're going this way. And then when it turned out there was a couple of saber-toothed tigers, now half of the tribe is gone, and everybody's looking at you and saying, Lasse, you were the one who made this decision. You said, and you say, yeah. Well, it could have gone well. We're not good at that. We're not evolutionary. We are not good at...
That's the path dependency thing here.
We're not good at responsibility. And that means that as we grow older, especially those of us who live in these crazy, rich Western societies where we have insane opportunities, we get better and better at pretending that we can't do things.
Safe bets,
but also just refusing to accept that you can change things, because that's much nicer psychologically than saying, oh yeah, I could change things.
So what you're saying is basically that, because I've always said that, when I got married very young, back to that again, and I think all of what you just said about people, we can also make an analogy for that for companies. So just now I've said that, so people, if they have trouble making that link,
yes,
do that, make that link, listen to it again and make that link. But I think what I said when I got married back then was, people said, but what about your freedom and all that? I was 21 years old, right? And I said, you know what, I'm not free if I don't spend my freedom. But what you're saying to me is I've never spent my freedom.
I'm at least saying that you probably, and especially you and your wife as the team, have an insane level of freedom you're not spending. And some of it you're not spending because you don't want to. And some of it you're maybe wanting to spend, but actually not doing.
Making the choice every day, right?
Well, making the choice every day, and also realizing that there are a lot of dreams that are, for a lot of us, quite easy to live out, but we just don't do them, right? Maybe one day we should go to Paris. Okay, how expensive is it to go to Paris?
There's also an attention span, right? I think
there's an attention span.
When I talk about this in companies and also here, right, say we could do this, but then but we have a limited attention. If we do this, we don't do the other things.
Bingo, right? We should do this, and also there's
that's just seven principle, isn't it?
No. You're not getting another one in there.
Attention, something.
I have a seventh in there, which is the Uber principle, which is don't be a perfectionist. It's going to kill you. But on that is...
So that's why you don't add my brilliant seventh and eighth principles.
It's already there.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. We can't have it. No, but what I say about that, and that goes for companies, but it really goes for individuals, is that people will have these, hey, I'd like to try this, but they hold themselves back for the silliest reasons. I used to have... In my old apartment when I lived with my ex-wife, we used to have 2 dishwashers. We had 2 dishwashers. Very simple, right? 2 dishwashers. And the amount of people who thought that was so wild. It was crazy.
Have you seen the Slavoj Zizek movie?
I have not.
No, but he loves to talk about how weird he is in that, where he's like, see, here's my kitchen. Look at my drawer. There's no cutlery here. It's my socks. Isn't that weird? He goes like that because he's made it intentionally weird, right?
And that sort of thing, it's easy, right? And it's this self-shame. I'm not talking about this whole, you can do anything you want. I don't believe that for a moment. But I do believe that there are so many things we could do, and some of them we want to do that we don't do because we're being held back by this weird idea that everybody's watching.
But that's because now, and I think that this might expand it again, right? But next slide said we can be anything we want. And I just always remember... because people ask me, how did you become what you do now? Why are you in AI, right? And I used to do poetry when I was very young, and then I became a history major. Now I'm working in AI and what's going in business consulting. And I always say, Chris Rock says that you can be anything you want in a show from around 1990. And then he says, so you're told you can be anything you want, but in reality, you can be what you're good at when they're hiring. So there is a demand side as well, holding us back, right? The whole of the shame of society and the demand of society holds us back. So,
but usually that's bullshit. That is bullshit, and it is the bullshit that is that keeps people from trying out things because they say it must be this way. And if not, then I won't even try. I must drive Formula One or nothing. I must have a book published by Politikens Forlag or nothing. We must go to Spain for half a year or nothing. It is so easy to do so many things today, and AI tools have just made it easier. Right? I write books. I've written my little book on getting shit done is my book number 46. And I have so many people like, oh, I could never write a book. And I said, of course you can. Super easy. I even wrote a book on how you write books in 3 weeks, if you want it, right? But that's not what keeps people back. What keeps them back is this idea that they've set up in their own minds about how it should be. It's this, oh, why don't you go to France? Or why don't you have dinner with old friends? Or why don't you try painting? Or why don't you do something different? It's this, oh, but people are going to see that I failed. Reality is nobody cares. Right? Why are we not, if we right now, I'm not suggesting we do it, and especially because we're going to lose a lot of the value since this is a podcast with no visuals, but if both of us got up right now, took off all our clothes and did the rest of the interview naked, who's going to notice, right?
You're going to notice,
and I'm going to notice because we're in here, we're doing it, but nobody else is going to notice.
No.
Nobody's going to notice, and there's so many things where what keeps us back is the fear that somebody's going to see it, somebody's going to notice, and they're going to judge us. And I'm not suggesting that we just walk the hallways of your company naked, because then somebody would notice. But there are so many things where you can do where you can do something that makes you feel naked and vulnerable. But if nobody sees it, if nobody hears the tree falling in the forest, does it make a sound? Sure it does. But does it matter? Not that much from a sound perspective. And we're so used to thinking that everybody's noticing everything we do. They don't.
This is all nice, a tree in the forest, right? And my brain just went on. Yesterday I went to see the King Oak, 2,000-year-old tree out on Jespris. And one of the things, I wrote a small post about it as well, a very small one, just saying that, resilience is not pristine. And I think we need to understand that, being good and being there for 2 millennia doesn't mean that you look like the perfect tree. My wife was like disappointed. This looks like a stump with a branch on top. And what is this? I was imagining a big tree, It was big 1,000 years ago, but it's still alive, right? Resilience is not pristine. I think trying things out, accepting that the perfect imagery of who you are it doesn't exist, right? The ideal types does not exist, right?
Not really. And if you want to count mistakes, then the best thing to do is to make no mistakes. And the easy way to do that is to do nothing at all. If you want to count wins or successes or things you did or things you enjoyed or things that made a difference, then count that, right? Imagine being a wedding photographer and going to a wedding, and then you give them afterwards 50 good pictures, and then they love that. And then you say, oh, but I took 200 that weren't good. They don't care.
No, but it's also this, the idea that maybe that's what we're doing with social media, right? We're creating a world where we have, or something where we have these platonic, idea worlds, right? And then, but what we actually need to understand is that we are constantly just trying to approximate that. We can never reach the perfect state, right? And then there's something like, what was us? Crap! I lost my train of thought here.
I'll continue your train of thought in a different direction. I think one of the social media problems we have is that we think that when we see other people's front stage, their performed selves, we think that's who they are. And when we see our own, we know it's not who we are.
No, and that's what I want to get. Yeah, exactly. So we think that's what exactly, and that's not who we are. We know all the bad stuff, right? So there's a disconnect between the reality of the failures in reality, but it's also producing things, right? Good things, and then the pristine imagery of how it could look, right? And I always go back to this poem, and now we have a poem again. It's not by a what do you call lumberjack. sorry, but it's by Günter Grass, where he says, and it's weird because my old German teacher taught me it, and I was like, when I was 17 or whatever, right? And then, for a weird reason, it's a short one, but it stuck with me, right? I don't know if you know German. You do probably do
a little bit,
but I will also translate it. But it goes like, meine alte Olivetti ist solche wie fleißige Lüge und von Fassung zu Fassung die Wahrheit mein Tippfehler näher bin. So what it translates to is my old typewriter, an Olivetti, is witness to how often I lie. And from edition to edition, the truth comes one typo closer.
Ooh, that is almost lumberjack poetry.
It is actually, but it's very, very, very
very,
good.
very nice.
Yeah, because you never get to the perfect state, but you get slightly closer with every time you fail.
Yeah. That's my tip number 7. That's my main tip. Again, the perfectionism is so damn relative. Stop it. I'm talking to you out there. Stop it. Your perfectionism is holding you back. It's relative. It'll be different tomorrow. Take the Olivetti poem instead.
Exactly. Claus, this has been a really, really great conversation. I've very much loved having you on the show. Really,
pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure being in here in this room with you, and it's been fun. And I think the energy has been just as charismatic and just as profound as I had hoped for. So,
that is kind of you to say.
Thank you so much for that. I have one final question that I know I told you about as well, right?
You probably did.
And I need you to give me a good long answer for that one.
Yes.
I won't interrupt you. So are you ready for it?
Are you sure you won't interrupt me?
I won't interrupt you because I don't do that with this one.
Go on.
So, Claus, what is the only constant?
What is the only constant? I think the only constant is bullshit. And because we could say the only constant is change, which is true, the only constant is life or love or all these things which are true and nice. But I think that one thing that is very, very clear, if you interact with humans, it is that there is a thin line between philosophy and bullshit. And it is whatever happens, whatever new technology happens, whatever thing happens politically, whatever new school of thought comes around, you can be very sure that at the very forefront of that will be people who realize that this is something that other people care about, and then they will spin webs of bullshit around it. And they will use it to change lives, to make money, to fix problems, or to make them worse, but all of it will be wrapped in this bullshit. And if you are not okay with a certain level of bullshit in life, then it's going to be really hard to navigate. Because the thing about bullshit is we tend to believe our own bullshit, and the bullshit of others we call bullshit. So to me, the only constant is bullshit.
And that's also probably something holding people back from making real change, right?
Yes, they're afraid to be labeled as doing bullshit. And that means they're losing out to the ones who are less afraid.
And that's how you said earlier in the show that now you're just philosophy bullshitting me. Or you didn't say that, but that's what you meant.
There's a saying I used to say as a joke in our old company, which is I'd say something that sounded insightful and then I'd say philosophy or bullshit discuss, and we'd always laugh because it's usually both. And the difference between the profound, the insightful, and bullshit is often razor thin, right? The only difference between a visionary and an idiot is history. Because it looks the same. And that means if you are constantly telling yourself, oh, but I don't want to deal with that bullshit, whether it's the bullshit of sales or the bullshit of kids or the bullshit of accounting or the bullshit of business or whatever it is, then you're going to lose out to the people who navigate bullshit. And if you are caught up in deciding what is bullshit and what is not, then you are going to lose out to the people who navigate that freely. So if you accept the only constant is bullshit, learn to navigate bullshit, learn to speak bullshit, then there might just be some gold underneath. Philosophy or bullshit?
For
Discuss.
a 1 hour, 27 minute podcast episode, that is the most, I don't know, aggressive end note I've ever had. Thank you so much, Claus. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege.
It has been a pleasure, Lasse. Thank you.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.